This is the Cedar Creek Church Living It Out podcast, a midweek reminder where we discuss key takeaways and principles from the weekend message to help you live out the truth that you matter.
Welcome to the Living It Out podcast. My name is Kelly Pagel, and with me today is Daniel Rose. Daniel is our student director at the Perrysburg campus. Welcome, Daniel.
Thanks. I'm really glad to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you. And I know you're newer on staff, and so I'd love for you to introduce yourself to our listeners.
Yeah, like Kelly said, my name is Daniel Rose. I am the director of students at the Perrysburg campus, and I'm just really glad to be here. My wife, her name is Shannon. We both just moved here recently after getting hired at Cedar Creek, and we just love being a part of this community. We have no kids, no pets, just the two of us.
Just the two of you.
Some plants in our house. So,
all right.
Yeah, we're just super blessed to be a part of the Cedar Creek family, and we can't wait to step into this next ministry season.
Yeah, it is upon us. Fall is here. And where did you come from?
We both actually obviously both of us, but we both came from Wilmore, Kentucky. So
okay.
Shannon and I were in grad school working toward getting master's degrees in biblical studies.
All right.
So, yeah, we had a lot of fun doing that. We learned so much.
Absolutely.
And it was just a really good season of life for us. So
Good. Well, we are happy that you are here for your next season and thrilled to have you as part of the students team. So, well, before we get started and unpack the message from last weekend, the Nah, I'm Good week 4, I'd love to ask you a little icebreaker question. Ben sort of kicked that off of what is something that you have to do that you don't like to do, Daniel?
Oh, man. I just don't like washing dishes.
Okay.
Oh my goodness. We eat, meals every day, and the worst part of those meals is washing the dishes for so many different reasons. Like, it's always the worst when you're trying to wash your dishes and like a nasty piece of food like touches you and you're squirming and it's just so terrible. But someone's got to do it. It's something that just has to be done, or you're gonna have dirty dishes everywhere, and that's just a mess. And you can't use your dishes. So
right.
But it is one of the things that I like the least.
Yeah. I feel your pain. Our dishwasher currently is not working.
Oh, no.
So I'm in that boat of washing all the dishes, and I'm married as well, but I also have 2 kids who I don't know how, but the plates seem to multiply. I'm like, do you really need to use 3 glasses? I don't know that you do. But my son, he stacks his glass. I'm like, seriously, 3 in one day? Like, I don't know what he's doing, but yeah, I can feel you with the dishes there. So anyway, well, thanks for kind of just sharing that a little bit. It's always fun to get to know people on that more personal level. So let's dive into our message this week. Again, we are unpacking Jonah chapter 4 with our Nah, I'm Good series. And in chapter 3, at the end of chapter 3, at the beginning of chapter 3, he ends up getting cod up onto the beach, right? And goes and gives his less than impressive 5-word message to the Ninevites and creates some incredible change. Like it was pretty fantastic what those 5 words were able to do and how the people of Nineveh changed. But then we open Jonah chapter 4, and where do we find Jonah?
Yeah, Jonah is kind of in a little bit of a mess. Like, he is just frustrated in chapter 4. It starts off with him being angry, which is just such an unexpected thing to see. You see the Ninevites, they've repented and they're moving forward, and it looks like they're growing and they're sort of trying to work with God, and Jonah is like not having it. It starts off and he just kind of says like, I'm upset, and he expresses to God this anger. And he says, God, I knew before I left home that you are a God of mercy. You are a God of peace. You are a God of love. And I knew that you would show mercy and peace and love to the Ninevites. And I just God, I'm so mad because I don't want you to. I actually feel like they don't deserve your mercy and your peace and your love. And he goes on to say, man, I'd rather be dead than have you forgive them. I mean, he hits it with the extreme, which is just so interesting.
Yeah.
And so, he goes on a little trek outside the city to wait to see what God's judgment is. He's assuming that God's going to forgive them, but he's waiting, and he just sits outside the city, and he's like, well, what's going to happen? Is God going to destroy the city like he originally had talked about? Or what's going to happen. He's interested, but also he's kind of assuming he knows what God's going to do.
Yeah.
And so as he's sitting and waiting for God to probably forgive the city, it's really hot, and God sends a plant to sort of provide shade, and Jonah gets to relax under that plant for a little bit. And then God sends a worm, and this worm eats the plant, and the plant dies, and Jonah is again saying, God, I'd rather die than sit in this heat. Just another thing that he is very upset about. He says death would be better than living right now in this moment, in this scorching heat. It's just such an interesting, again, reaction that he has, and the way that he interacts with God is intriguing to me.
Yeah, it is intriguing, and he's fussy. I mean, like, he is just pouting and bearing it all with God. Like, he doesn't hold back. So this is a familiar story. If you've been in the church, this is a relatively familiar story. And sometimes I think we can be like, yeah, I know that story. And, but what stands out to you as you go through this story again? What piece stands out to you and is unique?
Yeah. Well, prophets are always the people that speak on behalf of God, right?
Uh-huh.
They're the mouthpiece of God to society. They're supposed to be obedient people who speak for him and share his word and say, you should be living and acting this way because God has asked us to do so. And Jonah is like the opposite of what you'd expect a prophet to be like. He complains, he runs, he hides from God. And then in the midst of the goodness that after this word has been declared, he's angry. He's like, actually, I hate that this is happening. And so that's always stood out to me. And it really stood out to me this weekend in particular, just this sort of attitude that he had. He's kind of like this sassy prophet, which is just so, I mean, it's so funny to hear him and the way that he speaks to God, because it's so unexpected.
Yeah. Well, and you made a really good point. Like, he knows who God is, and he knows that God is good. Like, that's why he's upset about it.
Yeah.
That it's not that he doesn't recognize that that's a trait that God could extend to someone. He knows well that it is. And I think that's what makes him all the more fussy about it. And yet that makes it all the more ironic that he would be that way. Like, there's that tension there.
Yeah, absolutely. And he just the story sits in the middle of it, of him declaring who God is and still being mad at God, even though he's just being God, So that's just, it's funny. It's a funny little tension to sit within while we read the story.
Yeah. And I think we can almost be the Jonah sometimes too. Like, we don't always... Yeah, sometimes it's like, but why didn't they get what they deserve? We can get pouty like that. And that's not right. I'm not excusing that. But we do see that reflection back of Jonah to ourselves. I think if we admit it and look for it and then admit it. So yeah,
absolutely. It happens all the time, especially in the world of, I think, Christianity, where we're called to be a people who forgive, and we're called to be a people who move forward and progress and grow. The growth is sometimes painful, and the forgiveness is sometimes painful, and the moving forward isn't easy. There are moments in ministry where we don't feel like somebody might deserve something that they have. They might not deserve this forgiveness that God has given. And there are moments where you sit in that tension, and you're like, well, God is good. In the midst of who you are and how I feel in this moment, God is still good, and God still loves you for who you are just as much as he loves me for who I am.
Yeah. So good. So as we think about Jonah and what he did, Ben mentioned that one of the ways we miss God's purpose for our life is by running away. And I was like, wow, that was really great to acknowledge. It's like, that is so true. Like, sometimes we're like, nope, we're going to go in the other direction. And then we completely miss what God has for us. And he tied the story of Jonah. He connected that to the story we see in the New Testament with that of the prodigal son, or the lost son, in Luke, 15, verses 11 through 32. And so share a little bit of the similarities with those stories, and how does that apply to us today?
Yeah, I thought that was such an interesting comparison. I've never heard somebody compare the story of Jonah with the story of the prodigal son. So it really stood out to me in the message this past weekend. I mean, Ben did a great job at pointing out the fact that sometimes we run away from God, right? And sometimes in the midst of running away from God, we also lose our purpose and we lose the meaning behind what we do. And in the midst of that craziness, in the midst of that running away, sometimes it takes a storm, a drought, a worm to bring us back to God and to see that God has been there, to see God's work in the craziness. And in the same way, it took the drought of the prodigal son to see like, oh, I miss the presence of my father. I miss being with my father. I miss the love that I received. And even the people who are the lowest, the servants, have that beautiful life. They have something that I'm missing in the midst of this desert, so to speak.
That he got, that son got because he ran. He decided he could do it better than what he had, and he ran. So, and it's that trust piece too, of trusting that God is going to give us what is good and what we need, and that is hard. I think that it's easy to say, "Oh, I need to trust God," but it's not always easy to actually step out into that, and it takes humility.
Yeah, absolutely. It truly does. I think it's so important for us to see the kind of trust that we have to have in God. In the midst of life's craziness, the son didn't want to trust his father. And in fact, he wanted to live life on his own. He thought, I could do it for myself. I don't need your help. So let me take what is mine and leave. And we could try it. I think working in student ministry, that's a place where I see it a lot. We think we can do life alone, truly, and we find out that we can't. And it's hard. It's a hard moment, but it's always good to know that God is existing there, that God is still there and still welcomes you back with open arms. Yeah,
he is the God of second chances.
Yes.
Always sing the VeggieTales song with that. But you also brought up a really good point, I think, about student ministries. I think, you work with teens and tweens, and boy, that's a period of time in life where you really are thinking, I've got this. I mean, you feel a little bit like I can take on the world, and how easy it is, I think, for that age group to kind of resist and to feel like they trust themselves more than they need to trust God.
And I think it's a part of learning as Christians. When we develop and learn, to some extent, we need a little bit of independence in order to learn where God is in our life and in our story. And so those moments, I think, are important. They're painful, and I think they happen to everybody at some point where they learn the hard way that we need God, and God is an important person, important figure in our life. He is God, and He is the source of our life. And so it's just it's going through the adventure that we can have with Him. And sometimes adventures have crazy stories, crazy points. They have lows and highs.
Absolutely. So. That's a really great way of putting it. Yeah. And I don't think we ever get away from that. I think we are all often living in that tension. And once we trust, then we kind of, I don't know about you, but like then it's like, oh yeah, I trust. And it feels so great. I think I can do it on my own. And then you kind of like go this way, and God's like, no, come on back. And He welcomes us back. He does. He knows that that's part of our process of trusting Him more and more each day. But it is interesting to see that. And so there was a word that Ben used. I think it's adava, I think is how it's pronounced. Hopefully I have the accent properly there. This idea that you have to occupy your God-given space. Speak into that a little bit.
I think there's a level. I think Ben kind of used the word humility when describing it. And it takes a level of humility to know just sort of our space and our place where we belong. It also takes a level of self-awareness. And so I think that we have to do exploring. We have to explore ourselves in the deepest places to figure out where we fit in this mission that God has for His people, in this story, in this adventure. Just finding out where our place is in the midst of it. And it takes humility too, because in that sort of exploring of who we are, we have to be honest and humble enough to say, well, this is who I am as a person. This is who I am as Daniel or Kelly or anybody else. And we're called to step into that story.
Yeah, right where He has us rather than where we think we should be or
Yes.
would be better for us.
Mhm.
So, yeah. So, how do we do that? I think that's always the tricky part. Like if we're thinking about, okay, I want to take a step towards that. How do we actually go about living that out?
Yeah. I mean, the first place to start is, for me and in my experience, it's been a level of self-reflection and learning more about ourselves, our strengths, our weaknesses, the things that give us life so that we can find life as we step into God's adventure for us. And, here at Cedar Creek, we have a couple ways where we can do that. We're blessed enough to have something like Growth Track, where people can go through the 4-week course to discover their passions, their talents, their purposes, so that they can figure out where they belong and figure out where they do fit in God's plan for them and in this adventure that we're all on together.
Yeah, so well said. Yeah. So Growth Track is one option. I love the self-reflection, like actually spending time with God in his word and looking at what he says and who you are and how that all fits together is so important as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Growth Track is a blessing, but it's only a tool, right?
Yes.
So as we go through a program like that, we have to be honest with ourselves. We truly have to be who we are, and we have to ask deeper questions about what our role is. Because it's easy to go through something like that and say, oh, well, Cedar Creek told me that I should do this, but to truly ask those questions and decide for ourselves, I think is the heart of that, because at the end of the day, like I said, it's a tool. It's there to help us.
Yeah, that's such an important point. And it's an excellent tool. But it's not like you go through Growth Track and all of a sudden you're all grown up. Like that's just a piece of the adventure,
Yes.
to get into it and to find your place where you can make a difference and not be that Jonah generation that Ben was mentioning. Because, as he said, rescued people rescue people. And so at the end of the day, that is what we're hoping to do is as we recognize our own rescue that occurred through God's love, that then we can extend that out as well. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And we see that in so many different ways here at Cedar Creek through the many different ministries that we have. People have discovered who they are. They've been rescued and they seek to rescue others. And there are so many opportunities to do that. From the minute you pull into the parking lot, seeing people who are willing to serve by driving you on a little golf cart all the way to the front door, to people who lead groups, to people who pour into other people and use gifts of hospitality and caring for people, or people who lead student groups. They are incredible. It's so cool to watch how many people just care about the next generation and how much they want to see them thrive and how much they want to pour into them and be and show that they are rescued people who are rescuing others, who are showing them that they matter, that they have a purpose, that they belong in this adventure with Jesus.
Yeah. Well, and let's talk a little bit about groups, because I know that you have a big event tonight and it's going to be at all the campuses. So tell us about Student Night.
Yeah, so Student Nights are an opportunity for 7th through 12th grade students to come to Cedar Creek and find community with people their age. It's our student opportunity for worship, for community, for engagement, for fun. Every campus has it, and it's always from 7 o'clock to 8:30 p.m.
Wednesday nights, right?
Yes, it's always on Wednesday nights. And man, it's just a ton of fun. This week we have a lot of fun stuff planned for the kickoff, as well as just some a great opportunity for people to connect with others. At the end of the day, we want our students to feel like they belong in the community that we have for them. We want them to find their purpose in that community and to engage with others. And so this week in particular, we're really going to be pushing for that group experience as students break up into their different age groups and they get to see their friends that they haven't seen this summer. They get to maybe meet some new friends. We're actually exploring what it even means to be a friend in this first series that we'll be going through, and how to be a better friend and what it looks like to make a friend, or what happens when you lose a friend. And so these are those opportunities, I think, that are so important for our students to find community, to find friends, to learn how to be the best friends that they can be to those around them. So yeah.
And something special happens in groups. Don't you think that you're able to grow in ways in groups that you can't grow through the other options. Not that those other options aren't good, but groups offer something special in terms of spiritual growth.
Yeah, truly they do. They give a great opportunity for people, especially students. They're in a crucial phase of their life. For them to feel and know that God loves them. It's one thing to hear it every once in a while, but to hear it consistently from the mouth of a leader who says, I'm here for you every week. I'm here to show you that you're loved. I'm here to show you that I care for you, that God cares for you, and that you belong, is so important. And the more that a student hears it, the more that they begin to see and truly believe it for themselves.
Yeah.
It's something that we always want them to slowly start to own. And at a young age, it might be harder to understand, but as they get older, it's so cool to watch that part of that phase of life where students, it finally clicks and like, oh my gosh, God truly does love me.
Yeah.
And this community truly cares for me. And, my group leader truly wants me to succeed and they want to support me. It's beautiful. It's truly, it's a life-changing experience for our students.
Absolutely. And maybe something they're not getting elsewhere.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's a haven for them to come to and hear those words, those life-giving words.
Yeah. Yeah, truly. And that's actually one of our pillars for group leaders is to create a safe space, to create a space where a student can feel like they can be themselves, that they can be themselves and still feel loved. Which in the midst of all the crazy hormones that the teenage years have to offer, to hear that is just an incredible message. And I think it's really central to what we do.
Yeah, I think so too. And we have groups as well for adults. I mean, there are things that adults are going through that same thing, like, wow, how do I navigate this? And, when you're a student, you do go to school every day and you kind of have that group around. And then as you become an adult, sometimes those friend bonds kind of just drift, right?
Yeah.
And we're left with like, okay, so now how do I hang out with somebody and, that kind of thing or whatever. And groups offer that option as well, that connection piece around, they're all around Jesus, but they also might be around something you love to do as we get into our adult groups. Maybe it's around pickleball or basketball or doing crafts or those kinds of things. And so there's that shared life experience, again, similar, the student experience of, hey, we're doing life together. And Jesus is at the center of that. So our adult groups directory also opens this coming weekend. And so if you have not been part of a group, I would encourage you to check that out. We have so many different groups, from the free market groups of interests to Bible studies. If you want to grow in your knowledge of God, that's available as well. And if you have thought about leading a group, I know Daniel made mention of this too, the leaders that pour in. If you feel like, hey, I went through Growth Track and I have this gift of maybe shepherding or teaching or just encouragement, I mean, that is a perfect opportunity to step into that role and bring others along and share your faith with them and help them to know Jesus better through that process. So think about that, pray about that if that is where you found yourself. And if you haven't been through Growth Track, that's a great first step. If you're like, wow, that sounds interesting, but I haven't been through Growth Track. Well, there you go. That's a great encouragement to you to step into Growth Track. And perhaps this is where God wants you to fulfill his idea for your life, his goals for your life, and of the rescued people rescue people. And that's a first step there. So consider that, pray about that. So Daniel, thank you so much for being here today.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. It's been a blessing.
Yeah. Any other words for our listeners or any last minute thoughts you want to share with them before we sign off today?
I think it's just always important for us to know that Cedar Creek provides opportunities to be a part of the family. And we truly are a family. I know we have many campuses and it might feel like a really big church, but when we get connected in something like a group, we start to feel the true community that this church has to offer. So something that I always encourage people and I encourage listeners to pray about is whether or not that is your opportunity, whether or not you feel called to experience the community that we have to offer, because that community is so important to who we are.
Absolutely. Oh, well said. Well said. Thank you, Daniel. And again, thank you for being on the show. Listeners, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to spend it with us. We love sharing with you, and we hope that this time reminds you that you matter and helps you to live that out throughout the week.